Hello, I'm Fiadh. I'm an energy and spirit worker, Reiki master, and healing arts practitioner. Usually, what I offer are distance Reiki and intuitive healing sessions, often working with spirit allies, plant allies, animal allies. But today, what I wanted to offer was something a little bit different and just speaking from my experience of being a highly sensitive person and reframing that experience of sensitivity into being heart-centered and developing emotional resilience. I hope that makes sense to other people. I'll just say, I grew up in a household, well, my parents weren't like this, but my extended family, my peer groups, the society I grew up in, living in the US, I'm sure many people can relate to this. Sensitivity wasn't a good thing. If you were sensitive, you were weak, you were a victim, you just weren't cut out for life. People might try and train you out of it, which, let me tell you, doesn't work. If you're someone sensitive, someone coming up to you and being like, just stop being so sensitive. Does that actually help anyone? Has that ever actually worked? But growing up in this culture where strength was being very positive all the time, but not overly positive, not genuinely joyful, just positive. Being very stoic, very competitive, being very individualistic. That's something that growing up in you start taking onto yourself. At least that's what I did. Where sensitivity was a weakness, I didn't want to be weak. Therefore, you shove it down. You're affected by something? Well, you shouldn't be, because you're being sensitive. Shove it down. If the feelings are too strong, or you start showing it too much and other people can see it, then it's embarrassing. You're making everything about yourself. You're bringing the mood down. You're just too sensitive. You should just be able to take everything and never be affected by it. And that is what resilience is. It's being tough. It's being always tough and okay all of the time. Sorry. People next door have been doing demolition. So you might hear some banging noises off to the side. Anyway, I was someone who cried fairly easily as a kid. And you know how embarrassing that is when you're a kid. And no one else around you cries like that. I saw someone else crying, I would cry. I would talk about my feelings, I would cry. I would get overstimulated, which happens, or anxious because the teacher would suddenly call on you and want you to go up and solve a math problem in front of the entire class. Guess what I would do? And for a long time I saw that as weakness. And so you just shut things down. And you start shutting your emotions down. And you just become a little bit harsher. Taking a sip of my tea. And it wasn't until, I don't know when this was. Probably when I was an adult. Finally. I was able to gain a better perspective on why that might not necessarily be the healthiest thing to do, to shut all of your emotions down and just always be fine. For a variety of reasons, and one is that that's incredibly lonely. And we do kind of live in this epidemic of loneliness because no one really allows themselves to connect with themselves or show themselves to others. And regardless, the feelings are still there. You can't get rid of your ability to feel. Especially if you're a sensitive person. If you are someone who is considered a highly sensitive person, regardless, you don't even necessarily have to have this sensory processing awareness. It's just being a person with basic compassion and empathy. Those aren't bad things. That's how we relate to each other. We're humans. We've built societies upon our ability to relate to each other and form bonds. And you are never going to be able to shut down all of your emotions completely. And why do we view that as resilience? Often those emotions that we shut down are just going to show up in our physical health and our patterns of behavior. This could be like frustration that seems out of line with the given situation, or irritation, anxiety, stress that is disproportionate to the experience we're having. And there is this idea in psychology that, like, the more you push down something, the more amplified it's going to be. You know? Have you ever had something upsetting and needed to cry? And so you really tried to repress it, and it immediately feels 1,000 times worse. Like, suddenly the urge to cry has been amplified by 100. This could also show up as self-destructive behaviors, habits and patterns of substance abuse, in our relationships and how we treat our partners and our friends, and how we allow our partners and friends to treat us. And it's also genetic. Sensitivity is genetic. You can't change that. Sorry, I have like some notes I wrote down just about how I process these to help organize my thoughts a little bit. They didn't help that much, but you know, a girl's gotta try. So, speaking from my experience, this first part for me that has been the most helpful in terms of recognizing and being really heart-centered in my sensitivity is recognizing it as a strength. People with heightened sensitivity can process more information more deeply. They pick up more from the environment, and they can relate and understand with other people and with our environment on a more I'm trying to think of ways to say this without making it sound like people with heightened sensitivity are like superheroes and everyone who doesn't have this are like incapable of feeling a depth of emotion. But just recognizing your sensitivity as a strength, essentially. You know, we need people who maybe aren't quite as in tune all the time, nonstop, because they tend to jump into things head first. And that's not always a bad thing. They experience things with less inhibitions, with less anxiety sometimes, depending. But sensitivity isn't bad either. Picking up and being able to hold a depth of complexity of experiences, of emotions, is valuable to all of us, to your life, to society, to art, to invention. We need that also. So that's just one of those ways where just reframing how we view this, how we view this idea or this concept of empathy, of compassion, of being able to hold space for ourselves and others, and the depths of experience and life and polarities. It is who we are, and it is valuable to the world. And I think that's a good step to building that emotional resilience, which we often feel is not necessarily possible or is not something that people who are more sensitive can contain. But what is emotional resilience if not the ability to just bounce back from hardship? You can still feel things and bounce back. In fact, you know, pushing the things you feel down and feeling unsafe in your emotions, in your ability to express emotions, in your ability to hold space for those things and the complexities of life doesn't really ingrain the ability to move past situations. As I've mentioned before, it just amplifies them. The other thing that I've really found helpful for myself, and this is just me, you know, I'm just speaking from my experience. I think it's really important for myself to take time to process anything. Creating that space for myself at the end of the day, regardless of what happened, even if it's a good day, even if nothing exciting happened, even if it was a fully neutral day, just taking that time to sit by myself, have some silence, tune back into my body. Often, if you have heightened sensitivity, you're taking in a lot throughout the day, a lot of sensory and emotional input and awareness. So having this dedicated time to just be by yourself, to move through, is really important for anyone. And you could do this by journaling. I really like just talking out loud into the open air. I used to like journaling, but I have carpal tunnel, so now it hurts. Creating art, dancing, working out, whatever you need to do to move through the sensory input, the emotional input, and process it, and build that relationship up with yourself and your ability to feel emotions and feel safe in just feeling those emotions, not holding any kind of moral standpoint over which ones we should or shouldn't be experiencing. Just being with them, recognizing them, ultimately all of them as neutral. They're just natural. You can't have one without the other. You can't have joy without some sadness sometimes. Anger without... I know how I want to phrase that. I don't want to say forgiveness, but I guess forgiveness. I don't think that's necessarily an emotion though, that's just a choice. Grief, joy, pain, emotional pain, love, guilt, shame, whatever other emotions that my brain for some reason are forgetting, which is really embarrassing for me. All of them exist within all of us all the time to a certain extent. They're just our body and our mind's way of processing and moving through things and pushing them down, never letting yourself express them, just going deeper into spaces that are just giving you more and more input and reaction. Doesn't really support your body or your mental health or anyone else's health. You know, if you've ever gone past the point of overwhelm and then like still pushed yourself to take in more information and like keep going, you know it doesn't end well. It doesn't support anyone. And this is where things like creating healthy boundaries within our emotions is so important, because being open-hearted and tender-hearted and sensitive doesn't mean like always being soft all the time or being a pushover or people pleaser. And it takes a lot of effort and work to start cultivating those boundaries and recognizing when you don't necessarily need to give all of yourself, give all of your feelings. Where you're, you know, if you've ever been in a caretaker role or some kind of service-oriented position, volunteer, whatever it is, if you're giving away all of these emotions at 100% all of the time and giving all of the effort, it hurts yourself and it doesn't actually help the people you're caretaking or your friendships or your family members. And this is why it's so important for anyone really to create space for themselves to be alone, to process, to recognize what space they can hold for themselves. how you can hold complex emotions, and then also recognize what your own boundaries are and being able to feel safe in setting those boundaries, Just using a very vague example because I'm not trying to speak too much about my personal stories that involve other people. But I've had friends who have been very self-destructive and in ways that have also roped other people into those kind of destructive tendencies. And it had gotten to the point with this one friend where basically everyone had told them that their behaviors were no longer okay. That maybe they should slow down or rethink how they're doing things. And this person never responded well to any of that. So, of course, most people cut them out of their lives. Now, if you're someone who's very sensitive, you're able to empathize with someone's pain. I could recognize why they're self-destructive, why they do these things. But also I could recognize why me sticking around and just being yeah, this is fine and I'll still just be around you no matter how much you hurt yourself or others. That's unhealthy for me. And also I'm just enabling them. Does that help them? No. You have to recognize when you're giving yourself away is also feeding into other people's bad behavior. It's also not your job to fix people or hold emotional space for people who can't necessarily handle it themselves. And you can empathize with why they do things without feeding into it. And at the end of the day, all you can do is make your own choices with the information and the depth of processing you've created for yourself, and recognize when your holding space is just causing more harm than good, while still maintaining empathy for them. And I don't hold anything against them. They're just not in my life anymore. And that's what's best for everyone, really. So being able to create this time and awareness and boundaries even if you're capable of recognizing and feeling all of the different things for everyone, I do think that's an incredible strength. It could turn unhealthy very quickly if you don't maintain perspective or if you try and push it down or start shaming or judging yourself or others. But they can also be an incredible source of connection and creativity and problem solving and resilience for yourself and for the world around you. Let me think. I didn't script any of this, so I'm really just channeling and doing train of thought. And I do think there's something to be said for how we can relate to the world, how you can be in service to others while allowing yourself to feel very deeply, but not getting overwhelmed. And that's why you give yourself time and space to actually feel the things. Because suddenly, the situations aren't quite as overwhelming as you thought they may have been. Or even if it's a moment of incredible hardship, you are also able to build connections with others and with yourself to support each other during that hardship. I will also say, like, my final thought that's just popped into my head. When it comes to resilience, when it comes to being really sensitive during those times of hardship, my last little bit of advice that I found incredibly helpful for myself. Once again, pardon next door. They are so loud. All day, every day. Giving yourself space and time to put things into perspective. And that's also another part of this processing. I always need time for myself to just be by myself, to recognize when I'm feeling all of the things and, getting a little bit anxious, getting a little bit verklempt. I need time for myself just to mentally circle. And as you do that, you can start putting those experiences or that experience you just had into perspective. Kind of start letting the left brain, that logical side, get activated and balance out. So you can hold space for the feelings, all of them, while still maintaining a sense of, oh, okay, this is why I'm feeling it. This is how I can cope with this. This is a good way to process it. Maybe it's not as bad as what I'm feeling. Maybe I overreacted a little bit. Maybe it is really that bad. But I'm incredibly strong and I've coped with hardship before and I can cope with hardship again. I guess the example I'll use most for myself when it comes to processing and putting things into perspective, I do a lot of work with animal rescue. I work in an animal shelter, and one of the things that happens when you work in a role like that is there is a lot of death. There are sick animals, there are severe behavioral cases. And a lot of the time, people will tell you to push it down, push the grief down, or maybe not get so attached. But I've realized for myself, me getting attached to animals that I know are hospice is something that is extremely important to me. Because that's what they deserve. That's always how I view it. Is if I know an animal is failing or has a incurable illness, or there's a quality of life case, I do in fact like spending that time with them and feeling all of the grief and love all at once. And I haven't burned myself out yet from that. In fact, when I allow myself to sit in that space and feel it more deeply within the heart, that has allowed me to be more emotionally centered than when I try to push it down. I need more tea. Oh my god, my throat's sore. You know, I think animals deserve that love, and I can give it to them fully and without reservations, and that's what they deserve. And I can feel grief and love at the same time, and I can recognize, hey, this is what's best for them. Put it into perspective, take that time for myself to feel it, and then move past it. Not move past it as in like just completely letting it go and never feeling it again. Just recognizing it for what it is. I think this is like the part about grief work in general, whether it's animals, humans, situations we're grieving. It is full of complexities. If you allow yourself to lean into those complexities, it is an incredible source of strength and resilience. And that is what being heart-centered means to me, personally. And with all of that being said, whoever watches this, I hope it resonates. If it doesn't, that is also totally okay. Just speaking my own truth, and I hope it's helpful in some way to someone, somewhere, maybe, one day. Who knows? But I thank you so much for being here with me today. I honor you on your journey. I'm sending everyone all of my best wishes. And if I didn't say it already, have a wonderful rest of your day.